Welcome to One Bad Podcast. Here's your hosts, KD and Shaner.
All right, KD, obviously we do these episodes in kind of chunks, and we just had a lengthy discussion as to where we left off. So we were kind of talking about arenas and that, but we should hold off on that because we haven't quite, you reminded me we hadn't quite hit that yet. That was during the Black Buffalo era. But this is a really cool time to talk about something you said the words before we hopped on here, the sophomore jinx. So we'd done the Red Album. We had struggle for almost 10 years. Red Album comes out. Finally, we get, some hits on the radio, traction. Our shows are getting bigger. But of course, the next thing is the question we get asked all the time. What's next, right?
Yeah. And we never had to, some artists are never lucky enough to have that real success. And so they don't have to, live up to it after that. But we were lucky. The Red Album broke through after 8 years of doing it. And then in the music biz, once you have success, then you're sort of competing against yourself, right? To some extent, right? Yeah. And there's expectations set, right? So all of our fans were expecting Scarecrows Part 2 or Blues Part 2. And I think every artist deals with this if they've had any level of success. It can be quite a weight on your shoulders.
Well, and it is, man, and this is very meta because I'm not sure when this episode's going to drop, but our newest single, "Too Young to Burn," just hit the radio. It's actually streaming. Streaming numbers are crazy right now. So thanks to everybody who's streaming the shit out of it and requesting it on the radio. But it's kind of timely because we're getting asked right now what we started to get asked, or once Black Buffalo came out. We're getting asked the same question or having the same feedback of it doesn't sound like your old stuff, or it's not as good as your old stuff, or, you you run this risk of, like you just said, it's going to sound like your old stuff. It doesn't sound like your old stuff. Or if it sounds like your old stuff, they wish it sounded like something new, right? I've heard many artists talk about this, but if you're chasing what the fans want or what you think the fans want, because, oftentimes that's what it is, you get in your own head, you can really fall into a trap. And we started to discover this because up until this point, we're just writing, there's no hits, there's nothing to live up to this point. Right. So now it's like, okay, what do we do? I think luckily, I'd love to get your recollection on this, but we went from tour with the Red Album and I think we started to come up with ideas in that on the road. But to me, it sort of felt like writing, touring, and starting to write Black Buffalo was kind of like all one thing to me. We didn't really have this time to stop and be like, oh, wow, we got to do a new record. It was like we were writing anyways, right? And we had that 2-year almost break, as we said before, when Carly Rae's record came out and everybody got put on the shelf. So we'd been writing. So it felt a little more fluid. And I think we probably, remind me about the timeline on this, but I'd imagine we probably had a lot of the songs like Satellite Hotel working before Scarecrows and stuff had hit. But do you remember that time?
Yeah, good point though. I think it was sort of just that was, I would say, the busiest time in our career in terms of touring and stuff. They were away from our families more than ever. It was we were
saying yes to everything, right?
Yeah, I think it was I remember one year, a couple years in that time, being away from home 9 months of the year or something, right? Which people, casual viewers of the music biz don't really understand what it actually takes to break through, right? They just see you one night when you come to their city and you melt their face and they think you're living the rock and roll dream, which you are, but it's also a lot of sacrifice, right? I think we were gone 9 months of the year for those couple years around this time. Yeah. But I remember we rented a cabin in in the northern Ontario, but kind of right with the Manitoba border, right? And we did a whole writing retreat. It wasn't and we found out later that the woman who rented to us, her husband had just killed himself or something a year ago. So it was a cheap rent,
Man, I'm glad you reminded me of that. Maybe I blocked some of that out of my mind, but you're right that we did do that, exactly that. And that you are right. And I think we maybe found that out later about the death in the house and just kind of um, I didn't realize until we've done this retrospective how much we've stayed in haunted hotels, haunted houses. It's like that. We're gonna have to do like the OBS podcast, like Halloween edition, with all all of these things.
Well, I remember,
But no,
and
continue, man, because I think I blanked on that. You're right. We were out there for 3 or 4 days just writing nonstop.
like I remember because we played in Kenora, right? So Kenora,
Yep.
Ontario, but it's like right by you're basically in Manitoba, and we were like, I was like, what if we just take some time off and just, like, I always loved those certain records, like the Chili Peppers' Blood Sugar, where they rented out a mansion. We didn't have that kind of budget, but they rented a mansion in LA and just like lived in it for, I think, several months. We just lived and breathed the record and writing and all that stuff. I just kind of had a romantic notion of that, right? Like us hanging out, but a Canadian version. So in the kind of like the Muskoka kind of vibe in Ontario. And I think we're there for like 5-6 days or something. But I remember certain breakthroughs. Like I remember Decades was a big breakthrough when it came through. I was like, holy crap. Black Buffalo, I remember like this is gonna be a big one, you know. And then Satellite, I remember it sort of reminded me of sort of like a Slash riff, you know, that Hicks had. And I was like, let's do something with that. But yeah, I mean, I think that was, looking back, I think to go back to the whole sophomore jinx or whatever, right? Like, looking back, I mean, I remember this is what I really appreciated about the four of us in that era, was just like, we were like a band of brothers. We didn't care about whatever the trends were in rock radio, because we never, like we said earlier, we didn't know what the trends were. Therefore, we couldn't really chase them. Like, we weren't sitting there being like, let's try to sound like whoever was the hit band, right? We just did our own thing. And I think the four of us, deserve some credit for that. Like, we never tried to chase anyone else's sound, right? And I think I remember we just hunkered down and tried to find the best riffs. Always start with the riffs. That's kind of the OBS motto, and then build on that, right? And I mean, I didn't feel a lot of pressure to top that first record, or at least not that I noticed at the time. But I mean, maybe did you feel like from a lyricist, vocalist standpoint, like, did you have to kind of like feel like you had to like write catchier stuff, or how did you feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I mean, you make great points, man. I do think that we talked about this on all of those tours. I mean, oh my God, the hours and hours and hours on the road of talking through this stuff. And we didn't chase trends. We knew we almost couldn't. And I think, you know, we're now moving into the digital era, like, completely. And genres and trends, like, things are getting weird. Like, I feel like this might be a topic for another time, but I feel like, there was no, like, you know, in the mid 2000s, you really had that Nickelback sound. You know, you go back to the 90s, there was like the quote unquote grunge sound, like hair metal before that. And all, you know, you can sort of see like, this is the sound of rock in this moment. But I think by this time it was like Monster Truck was getting big. There was already, like, I think July Talk was starting to pop off in Canada. It was sort of like, well, what even is it? Like, I don't think that it wasn't as though we were like, oh, grunge is the thing, let's make a record that sounds like that. I think we were already like, we're getting a lot of headway doing our thing. We don't even really know what's popular anyways, so it's like, you're right, we just kind of did our thing. I think, like, I don't know if I felt the pressure, more just like, let's keep getting better. And I think you and I talked about that a lot, like, let's just keep up in our game, like trying to get better at our craft, you know, and write better songs all the time, or at least songs that we thought were catchier, better, all of that. And I think we were having a lot of fun at that point. And you're right, it was super busy, super tired, but I think we were in this rhythm of like, play shows, write songs, you know, repeat. And then we took that moment, like you said, to go out and really work on the songs, because we probably had a lot of ideas up to that point, but it was like, okay, let's start to solidify some stuff. And it was great. That was, I mean, I kind of wish we had done that again. We didn't, you know, we started to run out of time. Like, time got more and more difficult for us, just with the amount of touring and stuff, to take that break to actually write. But it was great. I remember Granny was scared because I'd taken a canoe out there was all those islands out there, and I'd never canoed before, and I got caught in a storm. So, like, you know, it could have all been over then too. But shout out to Granny for standing on the shore and wait until I got home. But
Yeah.
Yeah, man, I think it was a matter of just, we were always trying to up our game, right? Like we were trying to always write songs that maybe hadn't written before. I remember you mentioned decades. I may have mentioned this before too. We had a lot of songs that we started and we were like, this got a Bruce Springsteen vibe. They never really turn out like that, but decades felt different. I think we tried some different stuff on this record. This one really felt like us. I think we really hit our stride. And I've heard fans say that too, that Black Buffalo, maybe, their favorite song might be Retribution Blues, but a lot of people, and I don't know if you've heard this, they say that Black Buffalo is their favorite record, but maybe there's some energy on that record that just felt like it was really, like you've already said, at that point, it was like four of us, just almost like we always use this analogy of being in the submarine, you're like, whatever's happening in the outside world, it's like OBS is just powering forward, So I think maybe that comes through in those songs. What do you think?
Yeah, and I just want to say something, man. Like, we've been together for 20 years. I'm just so grateful that we still get to do this 20 years on, and I'm grateful I get to do it with you. Because honestly, man, like, we've had ups and downs as friends and bandmates, like any family members do, right? But
Yeah.
we could never, could have never done 20 years in a band with someone else. You know what I mean? And I think we just
Likewise, man.
thinking of all the shit we've been through, it's a lot, man. And I think, I feel lucky, man. I feel lucky that we're still doing it together 20 years later, man.
Well, thanks for saying that, Katie. I appreciate it. And the feeling's mutual, buddy. I mean, I think that we mentioned this before. If we were the same person, like this thing probably wouldn't have worked. And we've had our differences and worked through it. And I think that's like such a huge strength. You know what I mean? Like this is, we've talked about being brothers in this way of like, we're not blood, but it feels like family at this point. You know what I mean? And just like, but it's the family you choose because you're like, this is what we're going to do. And yeah, man, I feel very grateful too. That's and a good moment for that sentiment, because I think really when we talk about this era, man, it got overwhelming at times. Like just the amount of shows, like I'd never had to work my voice that hard night after night after night. Same with drumming is not, I mean, you're doing the most physical thing in the band, going on sometimes 20 minutes of sleep a night. Like that had to be tough. It was tough for all of us, I know, but that must have been tough for you.
Well, and you mentioned it earlier, like just a few minutes ago, and you're so right. I think this was, we were still having a lot of fun at this point, right? Like it was just like, we're working our asses off, no doubt, but we were having so much fun. And then, and with this record too, and then things got a bit less fun with the next record, right? We'll get into that obviously, but just pressure and all this stuff and who we were working with, all that sort of stuff. But, this was really fun, right? So I think that, and I wouldn't have the energy. I don't think either of us would have the energy to do what we did back then now. Cause it was like you said, 20 minutes of sleep. I remember a couple nights we'd go to the hotel and be like, okay guys, like, do we sleep for an hour or do we just stay up? Cause how crappy you feel after an hour's sleep. But I remember also being, no, we need sleep. So everyone set their alarms for 1 hour from now. We're going to sleep at this hotel, which we paid, paid the night for, and get up and hit the road and drive, and it's like, oh my God, I couldn't do it now. Right. But it was fun. And I think and I agreed to your point earlier about Black Buffalo. Like, I think we had a lot of fun, and it's probably the most technical, like the best songwriting, or like not best songwriting, but like best arrangements and stuff. I still listen back. I'll listen to, just like even things like Red Cloud. I'm just like I love that. Like, to me,
I love it.
Like just the arrangements and stuff. Vinyl Spin Burner, like it's just a ripper. And I think it is probably the best like writing and arranging we did. Maybe not the biggest hits. Like, the biggest hits are probably on the first record, but to me, it's like the stuff I'm like, I play this when I'm 90. I want to play this to other musicians. Be like, check out the song I play it on. You know what I mean? Like, Love Sick Love. Like it's a banger. Like, there's just cool stuff that we were the four of us. I think we're a collective unit more than ever on that record. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I think like you're 100% right. And we're coming up on time on this one. So we'll keep talking Black Buffalo in the next episode. And again, the tours that started to get not only longer, but like crazier in size. And I've been teasing arenas and stuff now for like 3 episodes, but if you stuck with us this far, you're going to stick. But I think the last thing I'll say before we jump to the next episode is that you're right that it was fun. And I think at this point, it was like, okay, we had Scarecrows went number 5, right? And so we were like, let's beat it. This was that moment of like, well, can we get to obviously number 1 would have been the thing, right? So I think we had a lot to shoot for still. We were doing that, like, momentum is with us. We're going up. We're working our way up. Our label didn't know why we were successful. So we're still just kind of like, all right, well, we'll make our own decisions. So you're right. This was a really creative time. You didn't feel like, I know I didn't feel like there was really anything on it yet at this point. We were like, let's get a bigger single. Let's get let's chart higher. Let's get bigger tours. It was like kind of the world was our oyster probably at that moment. And it just felt super, super creative for sure. So let's talk more Black Buffalo next time, buddy.
Nice.
Thanks for listening to One Bad Podcast.